They expected her to scream. They expected her to fight for every last penny of the empire she helped build. But when the judge asked Elara Vance if she accepted the insulting settlement, a mere fraction of her husband's multi-million-dollar fortune, she didn't cry. She checked her watch, smiled, and said, "I accept." The courtroom was stunned. Her ex-husband thought he had won the ultimate victory. He thought he had left her destitute. He was wrong. Elara wasn't walking out of that courtroom into poverty. She was walking toward a tarmac where a $65 million Gulfstream G700 was waiting with engines running. And the man inside. He makes her ex-husband look like a pauper. This is the story of the most savage divorce exit in history. The fluorescent lights of the Manhattan family court hummed with a sound that only the desperate seemed to hear. To Elara Vance, it sounded like a flat line. She sat at the defendant's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was wearing a gray wool coat that had seen better seasons. A stark contrast to the bespoke navy blue Italian suit worn by the man sitting 6 feet away from her. Julian Vance, the man who had once promised to hang the moon for her but had instead hung her out to dry. "Mrs. Vance!" Judge Holloway's voice boomed, echoing off the mahogany walls. He peered over his spectacles, his expression a mixture of pity and impatience. "Do you understand the terms presented by the plaintiff? By signing this, you waive all rights to the Vance Tech future earnings, the Hamptons estate, and the shares in the holding company. You walk away with the agreed lump sum of $500,000. In New York City, frankly, that is modest." Modest. It was an insult. It was less than what Julian spent on his mistress's lease in Tribeca in a single year. Julian leaned back in his chair, spinning a gold Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. He didn't look at Elara. He looked at his watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus that cost more than the settlement offer. Beside him, his lawyer, a shark named Marcus Thorne, who smelled of expensive cologne and moral decay, smirked. They had buried Elara in paper. They had hidden assets in shell companies in the Caymans, falsified revenue reports during the divorce proceedings, and painted Elara as a frantic, instability-prone woman who contributed nothing to the business. They claimed she was just the office manager in the early days. They conveniently forgot she wrote the code for the original algorithm that made Vance Tech worth $300 million. "I understand, Your Honor," Elara said. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. "Speak up, please," the court reporter said, fingers hovering over the stenotype. Elara cleared her throat. She looked up, her green eyes clear and unblinking. "I said I understand. I accept the terms." Thorne, the lawyer, audibly exhaled. He whispered something to Julian, who finally turned to look at his wife of 10 years. His eyes were cold, triumphant. He had won. He had successfully cut out the cancer, as he called her, without losing a drop of his precious equity. "Elara," Julian whispered across the gap loud enough for the front row to hear. "It's for the best. You were never built for this life." The judge hesitated. Even he seemed uncomfortable with how quickly Elara was capitulating. "Mrs. Vance, once you sign this decree, there is no going back. No appeals based on asset discovery. This is final. I have somewhere to be." "Your Honor," Elara said, checking her own wrist. She wasn't wearing a Payback. She was wearing a simple, leather-strapped vintage piece. "Can we proceed?" The room rippled with murmurs. The few reporters in the back row, hoping for a screaming match, looked disappointed. This was the woman who had allegedly thrown a vase at Julian. The woman portrayed in the tabloids as a gold digger. She looked like a ghost. Elara stood up. She walked to the bench. She didn't shake the hand that Thorne offered. She took the pen, signed her name in a fluid, sharp script, and set the pen down with a deliberate click. Elara Marie Vance. It was the last time she would write that name. "Done," she said. "Court is adjourned." Judge Holloway banged the gavel. Julian stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked over to her, invading her personal space. The scent of his musk, a scent she used to love, made her stomach turn. "I'll have the check sent to your mother's address," Julian said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I know you're staying there. Don't spend it all in one place, Elle. And hey, try to find someone in your own league next time. Maybe a barista. Elara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the crow's feet she used to kiss the lips that had whispered lies for 3 years. She felt nothing. The anger had burned out months ago, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Goodbye, Julian," she said. "Enjoy the company." She wasn't talking about his lawyer. She was talking about the company she had built, the company he thought he owned, and the storm that was brewing just over the horizon. She turned and walked down the center aisle. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom loomed ahead. She pushed them open, stepping out of the stale air of the legal system and into the chaotic hallway. Part 1 of the plan was complete. He had signed. He was legally severed from her. And that meant she was legally severed from him, which meant she was free to get on the plane. The moment Elara stepped onto the courthouse steps, the flashbulbs blinded her. Julian had tipped them off. Of course he had. He wanted this documented. He wanted the world to see Elara Vance, the discarded wife, walking away with her head hung low, defeated and broken. He wanted the walk of shame to be on the front page of the Post. "Elara, Elara, is it true you took a plea deal? Mrs. Vance, are you homeless? Elara, look this way. Do you have anything to say to Tiffany?" The questions were like darts. Tiffany. The 22-year-old brand ambassador Julian had moved into their penthouse before Elara had even moved her boxes out. Elara didn't flinch. She put on oversized black sunglasses hiding her eyes. She wrapped her gray coat tighter around herself against the biting November wind of New York City. She descended the concrete stairs, the reporters parting like a school of piranhas snapping photos of her worn-out shoes. At the curb, a black town car was waiting. Not a limo, just a standard Uber Black. Or so it seemed. Julian emerged from the courthouse behind her, flanked by Thorne and 2 bodyguards. He stopped at the top of the stairs, posing for the cameras, waving like a politician. He shouted down to the press, "It's a sad day." Julian projected his voice fake somber. "But we wish Elara the best in her recovery." He was painting her as mentally unstable. Again. Elara reached the car door. The driver, a man with a thick neck and a scar running down his jaw, stepped out. This wasn't an Uber driver. This was Cale. "Ma'am," Cale said, opening the door. "Drive," Elara said as she slid into the leather interior. "Before he realizes who owns this car." Cale nodded and shut the door. The tint on the windows was illegal pitch black. The world outside disappeared instantly. The noise of the screaming reporters was cut off as if someone had hit a mute switch. Elara let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a year. She reached into her purse and pulled out a phone. Not her trackable iPhone, but a burner. She dialed a single number. It rang once. "Is it done?" a deep baritone voice asked on the other end. The voice sounded like aged whiskey and dangerous secrets. "Signed and sealed, Silas," Elara said. "He thinks he won. He thinks I'm going to my mother's house in Queens." "The flight plan is filed," Silas replied. "Teterboro, Hangar 4. You have 40 minutes before the air traffic window closes. If you miss it, we're stuck in New York for another 24 hours, and I don't think you want to be in the same city as him when the news drops." "I'm on my way," Elara said. "Elara, yes, don't look back." "I'm not looking back, Silas. I'm looking down." She hung up. As the car weaved through the heavy Manhattan traffic, Elara opened her bag again. She pulled out a tablet. She logged into a secure server, a server that Julian's expensive forensic accountants had never found because it didn't exist on the Vance Tech mainframe. It existed on a private satellite uplink owned by Sterling Industries. She watched the live stock ticker for Vance Tech. It was trading at $45 a share. Julian's net worth was technically tied to this number. "Enjoy it for another hour, Julian," she whispered. The car didn't head toward Queens. It shot through the Lincoln Tunnel, bypassing the gridlock with aggressive precision. Cale drove like a man who had escaped war zones. Within 20 minutes, the skyline of New York was behind them, a jagged memory of a life she was leaving behind. They pulled up to the security gate of Teterboro Airport. The guard glanced at Kyle, saw a specific pin on his lapel, and opened the gate without asking for ID. They drove directly onto the tarmac. And there it was. It wasn't just a plane. It was a Predator made of aluminum and carbon fiber. A Gulfstream G700 painted in a matte midnight blue that looked almost black. The tail number ended in 001S, Sterling. Standing at the bottom of the air stairs wasn't a flight attendant. It was a man in a black turtleneck and a charcoal trench coat. He was tall, imposing, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that could cut glass. Silas Sterling. The billionaire recluse. The man who owned half the shipping lines in the Atlantic and a tech portfolio that dwarfed Vance Tech. And unknown to the world, Alara's childhood friend. The boy she had tutored in math before he vanished to boarding school. The man she had reconnected with 6 months ago on an encrypted chat room when she realized Julian was gaslighting her. The car stopped. Kyle opened the door. Alara stepped out onto the tarmac. The wind whipped her hair, but she didn't care. "You're late," Silas called out, though a small, rare smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Traffic was a bitch," Alara replied, walking toward him. "So is your ex-husband," Silas said, extending a hand to help her up the stairs. "But don't worry, we have better champagne than he does." Just as Alara placed her hand in Silas's, a screech of tires echoed across the tarmac. Alara froze. She turned around. A silver Porsche 911 had just smashed through the secondary security barrier, followed by 2 airport security SUVs with lights flashing. The Porsche skidded to a halt 50 yards away. The door flew open. Julian Vance stumbled out, his tie undone, his face red with rage. He was holding a phone in his hand. "Alara!" he screamed, his voice cracking over the wind of the jet engine starting up. "Alara, you bitch! What did you do?" He had found out sooner than expected. "Get on the plane," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. He signaled to Kyle, who stepped between the plane and the raving man. "He knows," Alara said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He knows about the encryption keys." "He knows nothing," Silas said firmly, guiding her up the stairs. "He just knows his password stopped working. There's a difference." Julian was running toward them now, ignoring the security guards tackling him. "That's my intellectual property. You can't leave. You signed the decree. You have nothing." Alara stopped at the top of the stairs. She looked down at Julian, who was currently being restrained by 2 burly airport security officers face down on the concrete. She took off her sunglasses. "I signed away the company, Julian," she shouted over the roar of the turbines. "I didn't sign away my brain. The source code. The architecture. It's all in my head. And the back doors I built, I just closed them." "I'll sue you," Julian screamed, spit flying. "I'll destroy you. You can try." Silas Sterling stepped into view, towering next to Alara. He looked down at Julian with the indifference of a god looking at an insect. Julian stopped struggling. He recognized Silas. Everyone recognized Silas. "Sterling!" Julian gasped. "What? Why are you—" "She's not flying Coach Julian," Silas said coolly. Then he looked at the flight attendant. "Close the door." The heavy door of the Gulfstream hissed shut, sealing them in luxury and silence. "Strap in," Silas said, moving toward the leather captain's chairs. "We have a long flight to Monaco." Alara sank into the seat, the soft cream leather swallowing her. She looked out the porthole. She could see Julian, a tiny thrashing figure on the ground, growing smaller as the massive engines roared to life. The jet lurched forward, gathering speed. Alara Vance didn't cry. She reached for the glass of champagne Silas offered her. "To freedom," Silas said, clinking his glass against hers. "To revenge," Alara corrected him, taking a sip. The jet lifted off, banking sharp over the Hudson River, leaving the city, the court, and Julian Vance in the dust. But the story wasn't over. They were just heading to the battleground. The cabin of the Gulfstream G700 was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished walnut. A stark contrast to the grime of the New York City sidewalks Alara had just left behind. The roar of the engines had settled into a distant, powerful hum vibrating gently through the floorboards. They were cruising at Mach 0.90, tearing through the atmosphere faster than the speed of sound, yet inside the air was still. Alara stared at the bubbles rising in her crystal flute. "You're shaking," Silas said. He wasn't sitting across from her. He had moved to the seat adjacent, invading her personal space just enough to offer comfort without being predatory. He reached out and placed a warm, heavy hand on her trembling knee. "I'm not shaking because I'm scared," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm shaking because I'm finally angry." Silas nodded, his dark eyes scanning her face. "Anger is good. Anger is fuel. But for now, you need to breathe. You haven't taken a full breath in 3 years, Alara." He was right. 3 years. That was when Julian had started the rebranding of Vance Tech. That was when he moved Alara out of the CTO office and into an advisory role. That was when he started coming home late, smelling of unfamiliar perfume and arrogance. That was when the gaslighting began, telling her she was forgetful, telling her the code she wrote was buggy, telling her she was lucky he kept her around. "Do you have the tablet?" Alara asked suddenly, sitting up straighter. Silas reached into his briefcase and pulled out a secure military-grade tablet. Connected to the Starlink maritime grid. Untraceable. Alara took it. Her fingers flew across the screen. She wasn't checking social media. She was accessing a command terminal. Green lines of code cascaded down the screen, reflecting in her eyes. "What are you doing?" Silas asked, taking a sip of his scotch. "Julian thinks I sabotaged the company." Alara said, a dark smile touching her lips. "He screamed about intellectual property. But I didn't steal anything, Silas. I didn't delete a single line of code. That would be illegal. That would violate the settlement I just signed." Then why was he chasing the plane? Because Alara tapped a final key. Vance Tech's core algorithm, the Oculus engine, relies on a hyper-secure authentication protocol to run its daily compilation. It prevents corporate espionage. It requires a biometric key to unlock the server every 24 hours. Silas raised an eyebrow. And the biometric key, Alara looked at him, is my heartbeat. Silas froze his glass, hovering halfway to his mouth. "You tied a billion-dollar company's functionality to your pulse." "Not my pulse specifically," Alara corrected, leaning back. "My Apple Watch data. My unique biorhythm. I wrote it into the kernel 5 years ago, when we were just a startup in a garage. Back when Julian told me I was the heart of the company, I took him literally. The system pings my wearable device every morning at 900 a.m. EST to renew the encryption tokens. And if it doesn't get the ping, the system assumes the CTO me is compromised or dead. It goes into fortress mode. It locks down all databases, freezes all API keys, and encrypts the client list with a 256-bit key that only I have." Silas let out a low whistle. He looked at her with a newfound respect. This wasn't just a scorned wife. This was a grandmaster chess player. "So," Silas grinned, "at 900 a.m. tomorrow, Julian will try to log in to show the board the quarterly projections," Alara finished. "And he will find a blank screen asking for user 0. He deleted user 0 from the HR database this morning when he fired me, but he can't delete me from the code. He's going to call you." "He can't," Alara said, dropping the tablet onto the seat. "I threw my phone in the trash can at Teterboro, and by the time we land in Monaco, I'll have a new identity." Silas leaned back, crossing his long legs. "You know I didn't just bring you on this jet because of our history, Alara." Alara looked at him. "I assumed it was pity. Or maybe you wanted to stick it to Julian. I know you two have been rivals since Wharton." "I don't care about Julian. He's a gnat." Silas dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "I brought you because Sterling Industries is launching a quantum computing division in Zurich next month. I have the hardware. I have the billions. I have the infrastructure. But I don't have a soul for the machine. Alara's breath hitched. You want me to work for you? I want you to be a partner, Silas corrected. 50-50 split on the new division. No marriage, no gaslighting, just pure engineering. You build the brain, I build the body. We crush Vance Tech not by lawsuits, but by obsolescence. Alara looked out the window. Below them, the Atlantic Ocean was a vast, dark void. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drowning in it. She felt like she was flying above it. 50-50, she asked. Equity vesting immediately, Silas promised. Alara picked up her champagne glass again. The shaking had stopped. Deal, she said. But first, I want to watch him burn. Silas pressed a button on his armrest. A massive 4K screen descended from the cabin ceiling. I have a mole in the Vance Tech server room, Silas revealed casually. We can't hear them, but we can watch the security feed. Live. Alara turned to the screen. It showed the familiar sterile glass walls of the server room she had designed. It was empty for now. Wait for it, Silas whispered. Manhattan was raining. It was a cold, miserable rain that matched Julian Vance's mood perfectly. He stormed through the lobby of the Vance Tech building on Fifth Avenue, his wet Italian suit clinging to his frame. He ignored the receptionist's cheerful greeting. He ignored the security guard who tried to hand him an umbrella. Get Thorne on the phone, Julian barked at his assistant, a terrified young man named Leo who was jogging to keep up with him. Mr. Thorne is already in the conference room, sir, Leo stammered. The board is waiting. The board? Julian stopped dead in front of the elevator. The meeting isn't until 2 p.m. They moved it up, sir, when they saw the stock price drop. Julian cursed. The news of the divorce settlement had leaked faster than he anticipated. The market was jittery. They saw Alara leaving as a sign of instability. Fools, Julian thought. I just cut the dead weight. He stepped into the elevator and punched the button for the 40th floor. He needed to project confidence. He needed to show them that Alara was nothing more than a glorified secretary and that he, Julian Vance, was the visionary. He smoothed his hair in the reflection of the elevator doors. Showtime. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was electric, but not in a good way. It was the frantic energy of a sinking ship. People were running with papers. Phones were ringing off the hook. Julian strode into the main conference room. The board of directors sat around the long glass table. 7 men and women who controlled the fate of the company. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne, looking unusually pale. Julian, said Arthur Pennyworth, the chairman of the board. He was a man of few words and 0 patience. Care to explain why our entire beta platform is offline? Julian blinked. What? It's not offline. I checked it this morning. Try it now. Arthur gestured to the large monitor on the wall. Julian walked over to the console. He typed in his credentials. Access denied. He frowned. He typed them again. Access denied. It's a glitch. Julian laughed nervously. Probably a server reset. I'll fix it from the back end. He pulled out his phone to bypass the firewall, but his phone wouldn't connect. Leo, Julian shouted. Get the IT director in here now. A moment later, Sarah, the new IT director Julian had hired to replace Alara mostly because she was cheap and agreeable, ran into the room. She looked like she was about to vomit. Mr. Vance, she gasped. It's gone. What is gone? Julian demanded, his voice rising. The root access, the admin privileges, the keys, everything. Sarah held up a tablet. The system went into fortress mode 30 minutes ago. It's asking for a biometric handshake from user 0. The room went silent. User 0, Arthur Pennyworth asked, his voice deadly calm. Who is user 0? Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He knew. Deep down he knew. Alara, he whispered. Your ex-wife. Arthur stood up. The woman you just paid $500,000 to leave. The woman you claimed was non-essential. She rigged it, Julian shouted, slamming his fist on the table. She planted a logic bomb. This is corporate terrorism. It's not a bomb, sir, Sarah said quietly, looking at the code on her screen. It's a dependency. The code isn't broken. It's just waiting. It's waiting for her signal. Without it, the encryption scrambles the data every 10 seconds. If we try to brute force it, the system deletes itself. Deletes itself, Thorne squeaked. Total wipe, Sarah confirmed. Source code, client data, backups, everything. Julian stared at the screen. The red text blinking on the monitor mocked him. User 0 required. System lockdown in progress. Time to total wipe. 23 hours, 59 minutes. Call her, Arthur commanded. I can't, Julian stammered. She's on a plane. Then get her off the damn plane, Arthur roared. Get the jet back here. She's not on a commercial flight, Julian said, his voice trembling. She's on Silas Sterling's private jet. The name sucked the air out of the room. Sterling, the shark that ate sharks. Arthur sank back into his chair. He looked at Julian with pure disgust. You let the architect of our entire product walk out the door into the arms of our biggest competitor, and you didn't check if she had the keys to the house. I didn't know, Julian pleaded. She never told me. Because you never listened, Sarah snapped. Everyone looked at her. She shrank back but stood her ground. I was looking at the logs. She sent you emails about this protocol 3 years ago. Project Heartbeat. You replied, approved, without reading it. Julian felt the room spinning. He remembered. He vaguely remembered an email titled Security Infrastructure Update. He had been on a yacht in Ibiza with Tiffany at the time. He had just hit reply all approved so she would stop bothering him. He had signed his own death warrant 3 years ago. Suddenly the glass door of the conference room swung open. Tiffany walked in. She was wearing a bright pink tracksuit and carrying a small dog. Julian, babe, she whined, oblivious to the tension in the room. My credit card just got declined at Saks. You need to fix it. I have items on hold. Julian looked at her. He looked at the plastic surgery, the expensive clothes, the vacuous expression. Then he thought of Ilara. Ilara, sitting in her gray coat, writing code until 4:00 a.m. to save his company. Ilara, who never asked for credit cards, only for his time. Get out, Julian whispered. Excuse me. Tiffany scowled. Get out! Julian screamed, grabbing a glass pitcher of water and hurling it at the wall. It shattered, sending shards of glass everywhere. Tiffany shrieked and ran out. Mr. Vance, Arthur said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. The board is convening an emergency vote. I suggest you start packing your office. If that system isn't online by tomorrow morning, we are suing you for breach of fiduciary duty. And we will take everything. The penthouse, the cars, the watch on your wrist. You can't do that, Julian cried. I am Vance Tech. Not anymore, Arthur said. Right now, Vance Tech is a paperweight, and Ilara Vance is holding the paper. The board members filed out, one by one, leaving Julian alone in the ruins of his ego. He fell into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, hoping it was Ilara. It wasn't. It was a notification from a tech blog. Breaking: Sterling Industries announces new quantum division. Rumored partner, Ilara Vance. Julian threw the phone across the room. It cracked against the wall just like his life. The Gulfstream G700 touched down at the Nice Côte d'Azur airport, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the French Riviera in hues of violet and burnt orange. The landing was so smooth, Ilara barely noticed they had hit the ground. She wasn't wearing the worn-out gray wool coat anymore. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a stewardess had presented her with a garment bag. Inside was a white silk power suit tailored by Tom Ford, sent ahead by Silas's personal shopper. "New armor," Silas had said, not looking up from his briefing papers. "You can't conquer Europe looking like a defendant." Now standing on the tarmac in France, Alara felt different. The air here smelled of sea salt lavender and old money. A helicopter was waiting a sleek Airbus H-160 to shuttle them the short distance to Monaco. "Ready?" Silas asked, offering his arm. "For the helicopter, yes," Alara said. "For what comes after, I'm not sure." "What comes after is the easy part," Silas replied, his voice low and steady. "You create. You breathe. You live." The hard part was staying in that courtroom. The helicopter ride was a blur of azure waters and yacht-dotted coastlines. They landed on the helipad of the Hôtel de Paris Monte Carlo, the crown jewel of Monaco. It was a place Julian had always promised to take her for their 10th anniversary. Instead, he had taken Tiffany to Cabo. Walking into the lobby, Alara noticed heads turning. It wasn't just Silas whose face had graced the cover of Forbes 3 times. It was the energy between them. They moved in sync, a binary star system of power and intellect. They were ushered into the Princess Grace Suite, a 900-square-meter palace of marble and gold leaf spread over 2 floors with a private terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. "My team has set up a server rack in the study," Silas said, loosening his tie. "It's isolated from the hotel Wi-Fi. You can monitor Vance Tech from there without being traced." Alara walked to the terrace doors. "Silas, why are you doing this? Really, a 50-50 partnership is generous even for you. You could have just hired me." Silas poured 2 glasses of water, no alcohol this time. He walked over to her, his expression serious. "Do you remember high school calculus?" he asked. Alara laughed dryly. "I remember you failing it until I tutored you." "Exactly," Silas said. "I was brilliant at macro strategy, at seeing the big picture. But the details, the intricate, beautiful logic that makes things work, that was always you. I built Sterling Industries on brute force and acquisition. But it's hollow, Alara. We have the hardware, but we don't have the innovation. Julian stole your genius and bottled it. I want to uncork it." He handed her the water. "And yes, maybe I also hate bullies. And Julian Vance is the biggest bully I know." Alara took the glass. "He's not a bully anymore, Silas. As of 4 hours ago, he's a victim of his own incompetence. Speaking of which," Silas pulled a remote from his pocket and clicked on the massive television embedded in the mirror. "CNBC is running a special report." The screen flickered to life. A frantic news anchor was standing outside the Vance Tech headquarters in New York. "Panic on Wall Street today as Vance Tech halted all trading after plummeting 40% in pre-market hours. Sources say a catastrophic technical failure has locked the company out of its own servers. CEO Julian Vance has not been seen since early this afternoon, and rumors of a hostile board takeover are swirling. Analysts are calling this the Black Tuesday of the tech world." Alara watched the ticker tape at the bottom of the screen. Vance 2257. It had halved in value in 1 day. "He's coming," Alara said softly. "He's not going to stay in New York." "Let him come," Silas said, turning off the TV. "Monaco is a small country. There are no shadows for him to hide in here." Meanwhile, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, Julian Vance was in hell. He wasn't in a private jet. He was in business class on an Air France commercial flight, squeezed next to a snoring tourist who smelled of onions. His credit cards had been frozen by the bank pending the board's investigation into gross negligence. He had barely managed to scrape together the cash for this ticket by pawning his Patek Philippe at a shop on 47th Street for a fraction of its value. He was drinking whiskey from a plastic cup. His phone was connected to the plane's spotty Wi-Fi, and every time he refreshed his email, the news got worse. Subject urgent. Board resolution. From Arthur Pennyworth. Julian, effective immediately, you are suspended as CEO. If you do not produce the encryption keys by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, we will move to criminal prosecution." "Damn her!" Julian hissed, slamming his cup down. The flight attendant glared at him. He looked at the seat beside him. It was empty. Tiffany wasn't there. When he had rushed back to the penthouse to pack, he found the closets empty. Her clothes, her jewelry, the Birkin bags he had bought her gone. The safe in the master bedroom was open. The $50,000 in emergency cash he kept there, gone. On the nightstand, written in lipstick on one of his business cards, was a note. "Sorry, babe. The ship is sinking and I don't look good in wet clothes. XOXO." T. She had left him. The woman he destroyed his marriage for had looted him and vanished the moment the stock dipped. Julian ground his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. He was alone. He had no company, no wife, no mistress, and dwindling funds. But he had a plan. He knew Elara. She was soft. She was sentimental. If he could just get to her, if he could just look her in the eyes and apologize, play the victim, tell her he made a mistake, she would unlock the system. She always fixed his messes. She couldn't resist helping people. He would find her in Monaco. He would beg. And once she unlocked the code and the stock rebounded, he would crush her for real this time. The next evening, the Casino de Monte Carlo was hosting the Gala of Innovation, an exclusive black-tie event for the European tech elite. It was a sea of tuxedos, diamonds, and billions of dollars in net worth moving around the room. Elara stood on the balcony looking like a vision. She wore a dress of deep emerald green velvet that hugged her silhouette, a nod to the color of money she was about to cost her ex-husband. Around her neck was a diamond choker lent to her by Silas, a statement piece that whispered power. "You look dangerous," Silas said, stepping up beside her. He looked dashing in a midnight blue tuxedo. "I feel dangerous," Elara replied. She held a champagne flute, but her eyes were scanning the crowd below in the square. "Is he here?" "Security spotted him 10 minutes ago," Silas confirmed. "He tried to get into the VIP entrance. They turned him away because he's not on the list. He's currently trying to bribe a doorman." "Let him in," Elara said. Silas looked at her. "Are you sure?" "I need him to see this," Elara said, gesturing to the room behind them where the biggest investors in Europe were waiting for Silas's announcement. "If he doesn't see it, he'll never believe it." Silas nodded to his head of security, KL, who spoke into his earpiece. 5 minutes later, Julian Vance burst into the ballroom. He looked like a wreck. His suit was wrinkled, the same one he'd worn for 2 days. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. He stood out among the polished elite like a stain on a white tablecloth. He scanned the room frantically until his eyes locked on Elara. "Elara!" he shouted, ignoring the gasps of the guests around him. He marched across the marble floor. Security guards stepped forward, but Elara held up a hand to stop them. She stood her ground, calm and regal, with Silas standing just a step behind her like a silent guardian. "Julian," Elara said coolly, "you're crashing." "Stop the games, Elara!" Julian panted. Stopping 3 feet from her, he smelled of stale alcohol in desperation. "Give me the key. Give me the biometric unlock. Do you have any idea what you've done? The stock is at $12. $12. You're destroying my legacy." "Your legacy?" Elara raised an eyebrow. "The code is my legacy, Julian. You just put your name on the box. I built that company. I sold it to the world." Julian screamed, his face turning purple. "I made you who you are. You were nothing but a coder in a hoodie before I found you." The room went deadly silent. The elite of Monaco were watching the drama unfold with rapt attention. "I was a coder in a hoodie who wrote the algorithm that made you a millionaire," Elara corrected him, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "And you were the man who fired me, cheated on me, and tried to leave me with pennies while you flew off with a 20-year-old. It was a mistake." Julian's voice cracked. He switched tactics, his shoulders slumping. He tried to look pathetic. "Elle, please. I'm sorry." "Okay, I'm sorry about Tiffany. She's gone. It's just us now. We can fix this. Just unlock the server. We can be partners again. 50-50, I swear." Alara looked at him. For a second she remembered the man she had loved, but that man was dead. This was just a desperate con artist. "I already have a partner," Alara said, stepping back to stand beside Silas. Julian looked at Silas, hatred burning in his eyes. "Sterling, you think you can just steal my wife and my company?" "I didn't steal anything," Silas said, his voice deep and amused. "I just picked up what you threw in the trash." Silas turned to the crowd. He clapped his hands and the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A massive holographic projection appeared in the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas announced, "thank you for coming. I know you've been hearing troubling news about the instability of Vance Tech's platforms, old architecture, unreliable leadership." Julian watched frozen as the logo of his company appeared on the screen, only to be shattered by a new logo, a stylized S interlaced with an E. Sterling Vance Quantum. "Tonight," Silas continued, "I am proud to announce the launch of the SV1 quantum processor, a new architecture for a new world, built on a code base that doesn't just process data but anticipates it." "That's impossible," Julian whispered. "That tech is years away." "It was," Alara spoke up, "until I had the resources to finish it. You kept cutting my R&D budget to buy Ferraris, Julian. Silas gave me a supercomputer. And here is the best part." Silas smiled wolfishly. "We are offering a one-time migration package. Any Vance Tech client who switches to Sterling Vance in the next 24 hours gets their contract honored at a 20% discount. And since Vance Tech servers are currently indisposed, I imagine the choice is easy." Phones started ringing all over the ballroom. Investors were calling their brokers. CEOs were calling their CTOs. "Sell Vance," someone shouted from the back. "Buy Sterling." Julian watched as his net worth evaporated in real time. The board members of Vance Tech, some of whom were in the room, were already shaking hands with Silas's executives. "No," Julian mumbled. "No, you can't. That's illegal." "It's capitalism, Julian," Alara said, leaning in close so only he could hear. "And by the way, the biometric lock on your servers, it expires in 10 minutes. The system will wipe itself clean. You won't have a company left to sue me over." Julian's eyes widened in horror. 10 minutes, you have to stop it." "I can't," Alara shrugged. "I don't work there anymore." Suddenly a commotion erupted at the entrance. 2 French police officers, gendarmes, entered the room accompanied by a man in a sharp suit holding a briefcase. They weren't coming for Alara. They were heading straight for Julian. "Monsieur Julian Vance?" the officer asked. "Not now," Julian snapped. "Monsieur, you are under arrest," the officer said, grabbing his arm. "Arrest for what?" Julian shrieked. "I'm an American citizen." The man with the briefcase stepped forward. It was Arthur Pennyworth, the chairman of the Vance Tech board. He had flown in on a private jet just to see this moment. "Embezzlement, Julian," Arthur said coldly. "We audited the accounts after the crash yesterday. It seems you've been moving company funds into a private account in the Caymans for 3 years to pay for lifestyle expenses. Tiffany's apartment, the cars, the jewelry. You paid for it with shareholder money." Julian went pale. That was a loan. I was going to pay it back." "And you also committed fraud during your divorce deposition," Arthur added, looking at Alara with a nod of apology. "You hid those assets from the court, which means your settlement agreement with Alara is void." The officer slapped handcuffs on Julian's wrists. The cold metal clicked shut, echoing in the silent ballroom. "Alara!" Julian screamed as they dragged him backward. "Alara, help me! I'm your husband, Alara!" Alara watched him being dragged away, his heels scuffing the marble floor. the flashes of cameras capturing his ultimate humiliation. She didn't look away. She watched until the doors closed behind him. She felt a hand on her back. Silas. "Are you okay?" he asked. Alara took a deep breath. The knot in her chest, the one that had been there for 3 years, finally unraveled. "No," she said, turning to him with a radiant smile. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." She looked at the clock. 8:59 p.m. "1 minute left," she said. "Goodbye, Vance Tech." In New York, inside the dark server room, a red countdown hit 0. The drive spun down. The code erased itself. The zeros overwrote the ones. The empire Julian Vance had built on his wife's back simply ceased to exist. But the story had one final twist left. Because while Julian was going to jail, someone else was waiting in the wings. 6 months had passed since the night the lights went out at Vance Tech. In the financial history books, they were already calling it the Vance event. It was a cautionary tale taught in business schools from Wharton to London. Never build your castle on a foundation you don't understand, and never ever underestimate the person holding the keys. Alara Vance, though she was in the process of legally restoring her maiden name, Thorne sat in her new corner office in Zurich. The space was a testament to the future. Unlike Julian's office, which had been a shrine to his own ego filled with self-portraits and mahogany, this workspace was open, collaborative, and flooded with natural light. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the serene steel-gray waters of Lake Zurich. On her desk lay a single crisp document. It was the result of the bankruptcy auction held in New York the previous day. Vance Tech had been liquidated. The servers, the furniture, the patents, the brand, everything had been stripped and sold off piece by piece to pay the creditors. But Alara had placed a specific proxy bid for Lot 404, deprecated intellectual property and original source code. The opening bid had been $10. No one else bid. The code was useless without the decryption key, and the reputation of the software was so toxic that no other tech giant wanted to touch it. Alara had won the auction for the price of a sandwich. She opened the folder. Inside was the ownership certificate for the Oculus engine, her life's work. The code she had written on sleepless nights, the logic she had birthed in a garage while Julian played video games. It was hers again. Not to sell, not to relaunch, but to bury. She struck a match and held it to the corner of the certificate, watching the paper curl and blacken in the flame until it was nothing but ash in her ceramic tray. She wasn't Alara the victim anymore. She was Alara, co-CEO of Sterling Vance Quantum, a company currently valued at $4 billion. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Chloe, knocked on the glass door. "Ms. Alara, you have a visitor. She says she doesn't have an appointment, but she says you know her. Her name is Tiffany." Alara's hand paused over the ashtray. Tiffany. Alara hadn't seen her since the courthouse steps, save for the tabloids. The last she heard, Tiffany was being sued by Julian's creditors for the gifts she had received with embezzled money. "Send her in," Alara said, leaning back in her chair. A moment later, the door opened. Tiffany walked in, but the strut was gone. The pink tracksuit was gone, replaced by a modest, off-the-rack beige dress. Her hair, usually extensions heavy and perfectly blown out, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired. She looked older than 22. "Alara," Tiffany said, her voice small. She clutched a handbag tightly with both hands. "Tiffany." Alara nodded, her face unreadable. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I assume you're not here to discuss quantum mechanics." Tiffany flinched. She walked to the chair opposite the desk but didn't sit. "I saw the news. About the company. About Julian getting 15 years. "He'll be out in 10 with good behavior," Alara corrected. "Though I doubt he'll find an audience for his visionary speeches in federal prison." I wanted to give you something," Tiffany said. She fumbled with her bag and pulled out a thick leather-bound notebook. She placed it on the desk. Alara looked at it. "What is this?" "It's his ledger," Tiffany whispered. "The real one. He kept it in the safe in the penthouse. When I left, when I ran, I took it. I thought maybe I could blackmail him with it if he came after me. But he's in jail and the feds already took everything else." Elara reached out and opened the book. It was Julian's handwriting. It wasn't just numbers. It was a diary of his narcissism. It detailed the hidden accounts, yes, but also his thoughts. January 14th. Elara is asking questions about the budget again. I need to distract her. I'll start a fight about her mother. That always shuts her up. Elara felt a chill run down her spine. It was proof. Undeniable written proof that their marriage hadn't failed because she was difficult, or unstable, as he claimed. It had been a calculated manipulation from the start. "Why bring this to me?" Elara asked, looking up. "You could have sold this to the Post for 50 grand. Tiffany looked down at her shoes. "I tried. They said the Julian Vance story is old news. And honestly, I'm tired, Elara. I'm working at a diner in New Jersey. I lost the apartment. I lost the car. I have nothing." She looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "He promised me the world just like he promised you. I thought I was special. I thought I was winning. But I was just the next victim. I figured, you're the only person who actually understands what it's like to be used by him." Elara looked at the young woman. She could have been cruel. She could have laughed. She could have had security throw her out. Tiffany had been a willing participant in the destruction of Elara's marriage, but looking at the broken girl in the beige dress, Elara just felt pity. Julian was a predator, and predators didn't just eat the strong. They ate the weak, too. Elara closed the book. "I don't need this, Tiffany. I know who he is. I don't need his handwriting to validate my reality anymore." She slid the book back. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. She wrote a check, tore it out, and slid it across the desk. Tiffany picked it up. Her eyes widened. $10,000? "It's not a payoff," Elara said sternly. "And it's not charity. It's a scholarship. Use it to go to school, get a degree, learn a trade, build something that is yours so you never have to rely on a man like Julian Vance again." Tiffany stared at the check, her hands shaking. I don't know what to say." "Say goodbye," Elara said softly, "and don't come back." Tiffany nodded, wiping her eyes. She turned and walked out the door, leaving the ghost of Julian's manipulation behind her forever. Elara took a deep breath. That was the final thread. Snipped. "You're too nice." A deep voice came from the doorway, connecting to the adjoining office. Silas Sterling leaned against the doorframe. He had been listening. He walked in looking impeccable in a charcoal vest and rolled-up sleeves. He carried the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove. "I'm not nice," Elara said, standing up and walking to the window. "I just know that hate is too heavy to carry. I'd rather put it down." Silas walked up behind her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just stood close enough that she could feel his warmth. "The Q processor is live," Silas said. "The encryption is holding. We've already signed contracts with 3 major banks and the Defense Department. You did it, Elara. You changed the world." "We did it," Elara corrected, turning to face him. The sun was setting over Lake Zurich, casting a golden glow over the room. It was the same time of day as when she had walked out of that courtroom in New York, but the light felt different now. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. "So," Silas said, a playful glint in his eye, "now that we have conquered the tech world, crushed your enemies, and cleared the wreckage, what is next on the agenda, Mrs. Vance?" "Ms. Thorne," she corrected. "Actually, I was thinking of taking a break." "A break?" Silas feigned shock. "From coding, from everything." Silas reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring box, that would be too cliché. Instead, he pulled out an old iron skeleton key. "This is the key to a villa in Tuscany," Silas said. "I bought it 10 years ago. I've never been there. It has a vineyard, a library, and terrible Wi-Fi." Elara took the key. It was heavy, cold, and real. "Terrible Wi-Fi," she smiled. "Sounds like torture." "Sounds like freedom," Silas countered. "The jet is fueled. We can be there for dinner." Alara closed her hand around the key. She leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a Hollywood kiss. It was soft, grounded, and full of promise. "Let's fly," she whispered. Julian Vance sits in a cell watching the world forget his name. Tiffany is starting over, learning that shortcuts only lead to dead ends. And Alara, she proved that the most valuable asset in any portfolio isn't the stock, the house, or the algorithm. It's the self-respect to walk away when you are being undervalued. Alara didn't just survive the divorce. She rewrote the code of her life. She turned a walk of shame into a runway takeoff. So here is the lesson. If they think you are nothing without them, show them exactly what they are without you. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and justice, smash that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you want more stories about underdogs taking back their power, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Remember, living well isn't just the best revenge, it's the only revenge that matters. See you in the next video.